God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf?
My name is Brett Johnson.
I'm Lynn Johnson.
And we'd like to welcome you to the Repurposing Business podcast that will be coming to you each week.
Welcome to Season 6, How to Work Like God in 31 Ways.
Welcome to the Repurposing Business podcast. We're talking about working like God and how to work like God in 31 ways. Today we're on to way number 14, work to protect. There's an interesting paradox in Scripture that between us and God, He expects us to take risks in our work, in our living. He expects us to live a life of faith, and faith and risk are two sides of the same coin. And so for business people, for people who are working, for people who are actually living a life where we're living by faith, walking by faith, trusting God, it's imperative that we learn to hear God, to respond to what He says, whether through His word or through other means, and then act on that, even if it looks uncertain. And that's the life of faith, and that's pretty normal for a business person. And so risking out of hearing, trusting, obeying, and acting is normal. There's a difference, however, between that and the people who work with us, people in our community. In this case, we should actually be protecting them, providing for them, nurturing them, and sheltering them. And so we have to distinguish between us living a life that's on the edge, or as somebody said, if you're living on the edge, you're taking up too much space, and putting other people in harm's way. You'll know that as a parent. As a parent, it might be completely appropriate for you to do something, but not appropriate for your 3-year-old or your 6-year-old or your 13-year-old to do the same thing. It's not an inconsistency, but it's your job as a parent to provide protection and shelter for that child. As time goes by, more and more of the shelter is removed, if you like, and that person grows up and matures into a functioning, responsible person. But our work should protect people. Our business processes should protect people. We're at a season right now where in the last week a tornado has gone through, huge tornadoes close to where we live, and a factory that made candles was just completely obliterated, and many of the people had huddled together in a hallway, but it was no match for the hurricane. And now people are asking, what were the safety measures? Were there appropriate safety drills? Did the company do what it needed to do to protect their people? Now, 2020 hindsight is always easier, but we do have a responsibility to work in a way that protects others. God can ask you to risk, but that doesn't mean that you can put people into battle ahead of you. Now, quite often, the work that we do, the product or service that we provide, has come out of our own difficulty. I'm not saying that God will protect you from difficulty. I'm talking about what we have to do with our work. So 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 4 says that we're to comfort others with the comfort wherewith we've been comforted. In other words, sometimes you'll go through a painful situation, and out of that you'll get a product, a good, a service, a ministry. And so we'll see people, for example, a friend of mine, Anton de Beer in South Africa, out of concern for his elderly parents, he developed a medical alert system where people can sign up on a monthly basis and have a medical alert system. There's many other things. I remember going to the Jacuzzi Winery. Now you'll recognize the name Jacuzzi because of the jacuzzi hot tub. And that family had some engineers in the family, and apart from making wine, they had a child in the family that had an illness, and they had to take the child into San Francisco on a regular basis. And so instead of taking them into these thermal baths to get treatment, they developed the jacuzzi to meet a need that they had, and that's become a household name. There are many examples of that. So your pain can be the source of protection for somebody else. And it's not that God will protect you of everything, but He expects that our work is to protect others. You might recall the story of Balaam and his donkey, and it's in Numbers chapter 2, verse 22, verse 32. The angel confronts Balaam. Now, Balaam is a prophet who was a bit of a religious guru who hired himself out when God didn't want him to, and he went and he worked for the competitors, if you like, and he worked for the enemies of Israel. And the donkey saw the angel, Balaam the prophet didn't, and the donkey tried every which way. And the more the donkey tried to resist because he didn't want to go past the angel, the more the prophet beat the daylights out of the donkey. And eventually the angel speaks to him and says to him, you have behaved recklessly. And God isn't into us behaving recklessly when it comes to our work. So let's separate us being willing to take a risk and us putting other people in a place of risk, and us exercising faith versus us behaving recklessly. It gets down to what God is saying and us being obedient to God. Now, I'm not saying that business is not a life of faith. Yes, it is. Well, I understand that. But there's a difference between faith and presumption, between working out of faith and working recklessly, putting others in harm's way versus becoming a sheltering tree and something that protects others.